The term I like to use when I'm thinking about my own self-awareness is your core. This is the person you are as you are. Mm. The ambition that I just talked about is what I call a real ambition. What are you creating that didn't exist before? But I'm with you. I think your credo underpins everything, which is, what do we believe as a group of people? And the thing that shocked me more than anything else when I reached the top of these organizations, and I remember going from McCann Erickson to Interpublic, which is the holding company, and my team, who were little youngsters right out of college, who now were basically running McCann as I was moving up, threw me a party. And they gave me a plaque. And on the plaque was, the Kevinisms we will miss most. and and on this things were like, weekends are for amateurs, just some really funny stuff. But what was really on it were all these other things I used to say, nobody dies. And I used to say that what I meant is, try something crazy. We're in advertising. Trust me, no one's going to die. Be kind. Listen, all these kind of things. And I'll give you an example. The best example of this is traveling to our office in Singapore, and I get to the point in the agency where you're like the ambassador. You arrive at the office and, oh, Kevin's here. Oh my God. And I'm wandering through doing my, the Pope, saying hello to the agencies. And and you remember I talked about this nobody dies thing. As I'm walking through the office, on this young lady's cubicle, framed, is the words nobody died. The point of this is, in a company of 26,000 people, something I said not only engendered a value system, but what I said traveled. Mm. Wow. Which is the other big lesson when my boss is saying to me, well, welcome to the club, kid. You are now dinner conversation, where what you say matters and how you say it matters.
Hey, everybody, Tamara here. Excited for today's podcast. Listen, I love my job, and I love that I get to interview amazing people. I've had such insightful thought leaders on this podcast. Today's podcast really moved me. My guest really moved me. It was inspiring and thoughtful, and it just gave me this sense of drive to keep going forward and doing what I'm doing, and to really step up my game as a leader for my team. I hope you get this out of it too. We talked about everything from catalysts versus resistors, emotional intelligence, how important that is, what it's like to be the one to create those breakthrough results for your clients, for your teams. We talked about a lot of things. What really, I think, binds it all together, that what really spoke to me, was the human element of all of it, of really connecting and understanding and really being really passionate about the people that you work with and that are in your world. So today's guest is Kevin Allen. He's the founder and CEO of Recap, a business development company which counts Google, Oracle, Expedia, Burberry, Verizon, etc. among its global clients, and the creator of EI Games, which is an award-winning online emotional intelligence games company. Now you can see why, just given what he does, why he's so into emotional intelligence and the power that it has, and how it's a skill that we can all develop. He's recognized as one of the world's most accomplished growth professionals, an expert on practical emotional intelligence in the workplace. He has a highly successful 30-year advertising career atop global industry giants such as Interpublic, McCann Erickson. Some of the highlights are he's one of the ones that created the priceless campaign for Mastercard, which if you're my age, you know all about that. He is the author of Wall Street Journal bestseller, The Hidden Agenda, A Proven Way to Win Business and Create a Following, and The Chase of the Missing Cutlery, a leadership course for the rising star. I think you're going to really appreciate this podcast. So without further ado, let's get into it. Hey, everybody. Super excited. Kevin, thank you so much for joining me today. I have so many questions for you.
I am so delighted to be here.
Oh, delighted. That's a good one. So here's where I want to start out. I was just telling you kind of offline that I had a short career in advertising, especially relative to yours. But I think for those of us who have been in it, we know really how hard it is to stand out in a sea of media and sensory. And it's gotten worse, but it's always been that way, right? You're vying for people's attention, asking them to do something in a very short period of time, but so are a million other brands and businesses. And I think that it takes a lot of risk and it takes a lot of creativity to stand out. So I just wanted to open up by asking you about how you see that, how you see that willingness to take those risks, to be creative, to kind of push through that noise.
Yes. In fact, what comes to my mind is a little story of one of the early few weeks that I was at McCann. Now, McCann Erickson, the largest agency in the world, and of course, Young and Rue McCann was pretty close.
Yeah, that's why we were second way back.
Yeah. We had 15 floors of 750 3rd Avenue. That's a lot of floors, about 1,500 employees in the New York office alone, of which there was 230 offices. I step in the elevator, and there is a guy, elevator closes, and there's a man who looks like he was time warped from 1955. The hat, the briefcase, and he keeps looking at me, and of course, we're riding up to the 20th floor, and he goes, "Are you Kevin Allen?" But yes, he said, "Yeah, I heard about you. They say you're the most disruptive kid in the place. Keep doing it." It turns out that was none other than Gene Kummel, the chairman emeritus of the company.
Yeah.
And I subsequently had breakfast with him once a month for what might have been 10 years. And the thing he said most to me is, don't be wallpaper, standing out. He said, "But son, stand out as you. Don't be somebody you're not, but make sure you stand out." And the other thing I would say is one of the terms I remember cooking up in my advertising career was what I called the category idiom. In other words, advertisers will tend to do the same thing.
Yeah.
So if you look at car advertising, cars on a windy wet road, and so on. And the path to greatness is to step back from that and ask yourself, how can I go that way when everybody's going in the other direction? It's a wonderfully important point, not only from a marketing perspective, but from your own individual growth perspective.
So here's what I'm curious about. How do you convince others to zig while everybody else is zagging? Because that's a harder thing too, right? I know I've been in the consulting world and used to be in advertising, and clients aren't always as risk accepting as the person who comes up with the idea. And I think that's true across business in general. So how do you think about influencing, convincing, getting other people on board for that journey?
Well, it's a wonderful question. And I would answer it two ways. One is when I'm in the process of developing an idea, take, for example, the greatest idea that was developed that I was involved in and I led at McCann was the priceless campaign.
I'm so glad you brought that up. Yeah.
And it changed everyone's life. And there were two ways in answer to your question. The first is there are four types of people that present themselves when you've developed an idea: catalysts, observers, followers, and resistors. Yeah. And catalysts are people that go, "That's great, I'm in," right? Followers are kind of like them, but they're not quite confident to jump in the pool. Observers, you have the old expression, they sit on the fence, they don't really care one way or the other as long as they're on the winning side. But the resistor is sort of like, "Oh, well, we tried that 2 years ago." And so part of the process is twofold. One is to attack your catalysts and your resistors simultaneously. In other words, you enlist your catalysts, but also you try to understand why the people are resisting. And I guess I would pose the question, anyone who's listening, what is the emotional motivation of a resistor? And it's fear. It's not that they hate you. I don't like the idea. It's that it makes them uncomfortable. So part of my objective is to understand that fear and bring them to me.
Sometimes I find too that fear is based on what they perceive as a threat to their job or their existence within the organization. So it's not, I think it's partially, I'm uncomfortable with that idea. That idea represents change. And I look irrelevant. I didn't come up with the idea. Maybe it means more work for me. Maybe it means I work differently. Like, I feel like fear comes in a lot of different ways that we don't necessarily spend the time to recognize. Do you find
so true?
Do you find that spending that time to have that discussion with someone, because people don't always realize why they're afraid too. Like, it's happening deep down sometimes, but do you have the conversation with them? How do you help them over the hurdle?
It's a wonderful question. I was involved in 3 corporate turnarounds, the McCann Erickson, Interpublic, and Lowe. And I applied the process of literally taking the organization chart and mapping who my resistors and who my catalysts were, literally, and putting the yellow markers on it. Yeah. And to your point, I visited every one of them. It took me 4 months to visit 120 resistors around the Lowe system, including traveling all the way to places like Bangkok. And I remember, in answer to your question, going to visit this wonderful woman, Van Son, in our office in Bangkok. And she was like the queen of Thailand. I mean, this office was like a palace. And she was a very elegant woman and sat me down. And I shall never agree to the strategy that you're embarking on, but I shall support you. And I was sort of like, what? And I said, well, Van Son, I'm delighted, but why? She said, because you are here and you've asked me my opinion and you asked me what concerns I had about them. So, and she became, and of course, a converted resistor is more powerful than a catalyst, needless to say. But to your point, you're right. The first question someone's going to ask themselves when you're saying, hey, let's go here or let's try this is, I don't know how to do that.
Yeah,
I've never done that before. What if it goes wrong, and so on? So you've got to reassure people. Is the short answer.
Did you know when you came? Now, for those of us who are old enough, remember the Priceless campaign for Mastercard, and that changed the credit card banking, like that whole kind of industry world in terms of how they communicated with people. I think there's other iconic advertising campaigns out there like Got Milk or It's Not TV, It's HBO that like kind of change. And again, these are all, I'm totally dating myself. I'm a Gen Xer. What can I say? But in the time, right, we're game changers about how it's not delivery, it's DiGiorno, right? Like they changed the category. They changed how we think about the category. When you came up with, when you guys were doing that work, did you know it was a game changer, or was that just, it's a little bit like a blockbuster movie. Like sometimes when you try to make a blockbuster movie, it flops because you're trying too hard. And other times, I think, like, if you look at Star Wars, Lucas didn't set out to do what we know as Star Wars. He set out to create this epic story. So, yeah, that's my question. Like, did you know?
Yeah, I think we had a pretty good idea that we had something very special on our hands. And it was by virtue of literally dozens of focus groups all over the country and watching people react to this. And I remember saying to Larry Flanagan, who was the marketing director, sitting in the room. Meantime, it's a pitch, so it was supposed to be kind of,
Yeah.
And I leaned over to Larry and I said, are you thinking what I'm thinking about this? He said, yeah, Kevin, I just hope we don't mess it up. So even he knew. But I remember in the pitch, at the end of the presentation, we said, we think this is a pretty good idea. Wouldn't it be amazing if people created, and we made a funny Priceless ad? Wouldn't it be amazing if this happened? We never thought in 1,000 years it would. But I would say this to you. In my experience, when 3 things line up, magic happens. And the first is what I call the conceptual target. In other words, if you're able to define your audience in emotional terms, like what is the emotional constituency and the emotional motivation of these people? The second is what's in the brand. What's at the soul of that brand? And then thirdly, the societal context. And that's what most people forget. If you're creating a following or you're leading a company or you're doing a brand, you always remember something's happening out there. I should say my window's behind me. That is what ignites all of this. But yeah, I think we knew it was great, but we had no idea how many lives would be changed by that idea.
Well, for anyone who doesn't know it, who's listening or watching, I suggest you go later to YouTube and check it out, because it really did change the game. And it was so surprising, but also, to your point, I think it connected emotionally. And when I think about marketing, let's just to bring it to marketing for a second, that actually I pay attention to, it really is not just funny and clever and witty and whatever, that actually really does connect emotionally. So speaking of emotional, one of your big things about being the buoyant leader and leading with emotional intelligence. So you've spent a lot of years leading and obviously done it well. So talk more about that and where emotional intelligence plays in.
I'm going to start talking about it from the point of view of, necessity is the mother of invention. And here's what I mean by that. If you said hello to Kevin at 5 years old, he would burst into tears. I was I remember my aunt, I had an Aunt Thelma, mentioned Aunt Thelma, and she was a nurse. And in those days, they wore these funny little white hats and those big red lipstick. And I adored her. And I remember, as most kids will do, listening at the top of the stairs to what my mother and others were talking about in the kitchen, which was just below. And I remember listening. I remember Aunt Thelma going, Joni, I worry for that kid. Is so fragile. I don't know what's going to become of him. So I'm thinking, oh my God. And certainly when I became, in my early 20s, being in the business back in the 70s, there was an archetype for leadership. It was A, was a male. B, it looked like a military general.
Yeah.
They typically had a deep, gravelly voice, and they barked out orders. And I thought, well, if that's the definition of leadership, I ain't that. I can tell you that I was just talking to a group earlier today. If someone put in the company leadership training, I just assumed it was for somebody else. I didn't self-identify as that. So by default, the one thing I did have, that movie where the kid can see ghosts? I forget what it was.
I See Dead People, that one?
Success. Yeah, it was the one with Bruce Willis. Yes, that's the one.
Yeah.
The point is, just like he saw ghosts, I was given this extraordinary ability to sense how people feel. And that's both a blessing and a curse. You walk into a room, you look around and go, okay, people are not happy here, or whatever it happens to be. Call it my smeller or my emotional antenna. And that is what turned out to be the greatest asset I could have. And at the core of it is human empathy. So people will say to me, what is the top quality of leadership? Is it decisiveness? Is it? I said, no, it's the ability to put yourself in the shoes of others and connect with them to the emotional motivation they possess. And I guess it came instinctively to me, but it's teachable, and it's the rootings of EI.
So how do you, if you don't have the gift, how do you teach it?
Well, the good news is, unlike IQ, so Kevin's IQ will always be what it's going to be. And if you saw my board scores, you would conclude that Kevin's a dope, right? Personality, obviously I have a fixed personality, but in EI is highly learnable. But the first and most important thing is to avail yourself of being intuitive and being empathetic. I mean, it's easy to go, I want you to do this, as opposed to taking the time to explain based upon understanding. If I say that this, if I give someone instructions in a certain way, how are they going to feel? That takes time. Yeah. And some people don't want to take the time. So I think it is a very teachable phenomenon, but it starts with placing others before you. How do they feel? And how am I going to apply myself to that?
So it's so interesting, because when I look back at my career and before doing my, jumping ship and kind of doing my own thing, the bosses that I worked for, some of them really had it and some of them really didn't. Yeah. And I definitely could tell you that the ones that didn't, I didn't like, to be honest. Right? I mean, I was also in my 20s, so I was like, I don't like you. But I just, like I didn't feel like I connected with them. I never felt like a team with them. I never felt like they understood where I was coming from. And I wasn't asking for empathy of like, oh, I'm late giving you this deliverable. You should empathize because I was up late last night and right. Whatever. It wasn't that. It was just, we just never really connected. But I do find that like, some people who are introverts or just more task oriented or even goal oriented sometimes struggle with that empathy. And I do find that active listening is a great start. Have you found other tools that have helped you or other people on your team maybe not become as intuitive as you are, but at least get that muscle going?
I spend a lot of time with companies like the Googles of the world and others who have this problem. People come up through the ranks of being immense technology leaders, and then overnight, boop, here, you're in charge.
Yeah.
And you're challenged. What I would say is there are a lot of great techniques. I call the art of the ask is something I talk about, which is 5 essential questions and how to ask them. And the use of questioning is a great place to start, because the first thing the questioning does is it changes the dialogue from me being a teller to me being an asker. So if I ask someone before I'm going to give a task, how are you feeling today? And how do you feel about the task ahead of us? I'm going to get a very different response as I articulate what it is I want. So there are a number of techniques that people who might not be intuitive, but can use them effectively and connect with people on a completely different level.
So what are some of you, I think you just shared one of them. What are one or two other questions that you think really work to get that empathy and that dialogue, to your point, that dialogue going?
Yeah. I think that they come in the form of 3 different, what I call hidden agendas, which was part of the first book that I wrote, which is the first is sort of the ambition, So what do you seek?
Right.
What does success look like for you? Now imagine, because typically what leaders will often do is they give an order within the context of what success looks like for them. Right? So the first thing is, someone might say, well, success for me means that I can do in the course of the day what you're asking of me. The second is, what I call a value system question. What do you believe? What do you think we believe? And what do you think we're trying to do? And aligning belief systems is a wonderful way of questioning.
Can I just back up before you go on real quick? I love that one, especially what you just said. So I just want to take a moment so we don't go too fast for our listeners.
Please do.
Because asking people what do you believe we're doing here? I think not only does it help with empathy, but it helps make sure we're all on the same page. I mean, how many times I'm in the innovation space, so I can't tell you the different definitions I get when I talk to a team about what are we doing here with innovation. Like someone's disruptive technology, another person is breaking all the rules, another person is adding creativity. Like, I think that's a really powerful question. I just wanted to stop and make sure we all heard that.
So I think the term I like to use when I'm thinking about my own self-awareness is your core. This is the person you are as you are. The ambition that I just talked about is what I call a real ambition. What are you creating that didn't exist before? But I'm with you. I think your credo underpins everything, which is, what do we believe as a group of people? And the thing that shocked me more than anything else when I reached the top of these organizations, and I remember going from McCann Erickson to Interpublic, which is the holding company, and my team, who were little youngsters right out of college, who now were basically running McCann as I was moving up, threw me a party. And they gave me a plaque. And on the plaque was, the Kevinisms we will miss most. And and on this things were like, weekends are for amateurs. There's some really funny stuff. But what was really on it were all these other things I used to say, nobody dies. And I used to say that what I meant is, try something crazy. We're in advertising. Trust me, no one's going to die. Be kind. Listen, all these kind of things. And I'll give you an example. The best example of this is traveling to our office in Singapore I get to the point in the agency where like you're like the ambassador. You arrive at the office and Kevin's here. Oh my God. And I'm wandering through doing my like the Pope, saying hello to the agency. And and remember I talked about this nobody dies thing. As I'm walking through the office, on this young lady's cubicle, framed is the words nobody dies. The point of this is, in a company of 26,000 people, something I said not only engendered a value system, but what I said traveled. Wow. Which is the other big lesson when my boss is saying to me, well, welcome to the club, kid. You are now dinner conversation, where what you say matters and how you say it matters.
Do you think, I have so many questions about that in itself, because I think that goes back to what you were saying too about standing out, right? And not being afraid, and kind of looping it back to our initial conversation about advertising and leadership. Do you think that happens by being bold and consistent? Hopefully that question makes sense.
I think it is. The answer is yes. I think it's bold, consistent, and distinctively yours. Now, let me explain. Kevin Allen is a very eccentric fellow. You could probably see by all this crazy stuff behind me, of which I have bucket loads. And the one thing I realized was the key to my success was the day that Bill Genge from Ketchum Advertising took me aside and said, son, you need to step out from behind that suit because there's a pretty crazy kid in there. Let him. So people that are doors, and I was rather shy and blah blah blah. I'm paid for failure. I turned out as perfect man in my blue suit and my by that genuinely was being my. People love emails from me. So instead of saying, good morning, the synergy of the paradigm,
Nobody wants to hear that. Hey, Kevin, very quickly, your video froze. Oh, there we go. Okay, now we're caught up.
Okay.
I can hear you, but your video froze. Okay, we'll cut that out
great.
in the longer podcast.
Okay, great.
Yeah. So I love that. I just think that's a really important lesson. So over here at Laundry, we are all about helping people become everyday innovators, because we're all innovators in some way. And but part of that is being your best self, whatever that is for you, in your distinct way. So that really resonates with me, because I think we spend too much time trying to be like what we think that archetype is. And I'll just tell you very quickly, though it's funny that I'm wearing red today when I tell you this story, but in the 90s, when I moved to New York City, and I was in advertising and then brand strategy and innovation at a global consulting firm, I thought, and I was in the mid 90s. So for anyone listening, you're going to be like, that's the most hideous outfit I've ever heard. But I had my favorite Ann Taylor 3-piece matching red suit and scrunchie, because that's what I thought leadership looked like. If I wanted to be a professional woman, I needed to have this outfit, right? Or every outfit had to match like that. And it's so not me. And it's like I was hiding behind the suit like you. And it wasn't until this lovely boss that I had named Alpa, who finally was like, what are you doing? Like, I've seen you on the weekends. Like, this is not you.
Right.
Step out of that suit. So your story really resonates, because I had a similar experience of, and hey, if you are that red 3-piece suit, great, good for you. Like, be that. But it was not me, but I tried so hard, especially early on in my career, to emulate what I thought I had to look like.
Yeah. And it's such an important thing. And I also think, I believe in a term called cultural permission, that especially when you're involved in influencing people to innovate and create. I mean, you can't say to someone, all right, no, so today is 9 to 5. I would like by 5 o'clock, 55.5 pounds of innovation.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean? You're setting a climate. And most importantly, you're creating a condition for permission for them to be the people they are, to feel loved and supported. And notice I used the word love. I didn't like the people I worked with. I mean, I disliked some of them, but for the most part, I adored them.
Yeah.
And I wanted them to succeed. And most importantly, as a leader, I realized that my job is to create an environment for them to be safe and to feel as if they can reach for the skies.
I think if we get to a place where we, instead of resist or fear people's differences, we appreciate them, we can adore more people. I think we actually find that people that we don't like bring a lot to the table. There's friction between us that we just have to get.
Yes.
I got a couple questions in before I want to move on to the next topic. So one is, hold on, gotta get my glasses on to read. Okay. So the question is, it's always so awkward on camera. The question is, I have really strong empathy, and I totally agree with what you're saying. Sometimes I'm afraid I step over the line of being too lenient. How do you balance empathy with those tough conversations or leadership moments that aren't as fun? Great question. Thank you for asking that.
Fantastic question. And you're speaking to Kevin, the middle child, Kevin, the kid who hates confrontation. And it was the most difficult thing for me to do, to have these challenging conversations. I think ultimately, and that also includes, by the way, letting people go, which was the hardest thing I've ever had to do.
The worst.
I think the first thing to say is, if you truly care about the people you're working with, let's even think of the people that are working for you, and you care about them deeply, then you have there's a wonderful term legal people use, a fiduciary duty. Mm-hmm. You have a fiduciary duty to them. If there's something they're doing that will result in harming their prospects for their future, you've got to communicate that to them. But here's the difference. It's one thing to say, I don't like the way you opened the meeting the other day. You should do it this way, as opposed to a framing. That's why I love Dr. Kahneman, his concept of framing. It's how you frame things, right? I believe that you will run this company someday. I truly do. And as a consequence, how you communicate and how you frame things in groups of people is really important, which means you've got to start from a positivity. So, for example, if we take your opening yesterday, here's how I would have done it. Now, remember, they got to feel good coming out of that conversation. So I found a way, through my own empathetic way, to still have those conversations, as hard as they are, and have people come out of that conversation feeling intact.
So I'd love to get your perspective on this, because what you're saying really resonates with me. And I'll tell you, it must have been 10 years ago now. I was running this consulting firm, and I got what I would consider some of the best feedback ever. We did one of these 360 performance review assessment things. And the best consistent feedback that I got was, Tamara's really blunt, but you always know where she stands. And you always know she means it with love, or something like that. Maybe it wasn't with love, maybe like she means well. And I thought, like, for me personally, I was like, wow, I think that's the best feedback I've ever gotten. Because what I took from that was, okay, people know I'm coming from a really good place. I want them to improve. Sometimes the conversations are fun. Sometimes the conversations are not fun, but I'll always tell you. And that place is coming from love and wanting you to improve. So I'm just curious about where kind of for you see intent fit into that. Because to me, that's God. You could say, Kevin, you could say the meaning, you could tell me, I'm like, Tamara, those pants do make your butt look big. But if I knew you like, you wanted me to look my best, I'd be like, oh, thanks for telling me. Right. So
again, I think it's a question of framing. I remember creative people. I ran into a creative director after years and years that he worked for me in the early days. And he said, we used to say to each other after we presented creative to you, we'd walk out of the office and we'd turn to each other and they'd say, I think we just had our ass kicked big time. Because my objective was to deliver the news to them, but leave leave them intact. Because remember, people, you got to come back. They got to come back for the game.
Right.
Back and rebound. But I think we do people a terrible disservice when we're not direct and when we should be.
Yeah, I think you're so right. I think that point right there is so important, that sometimes the conversations are fun, sometimes they're not, but they got to come back for the game. I think that is really well said. That is right. Your team needs to move forward. So I want to make sure that we get in, because I wanted to ask you about the 4 phases of change, embracing change and its human dynamics. I'm all about the human side of it. So I really wanted to ask you about this.
Yeah. So I think having been in a position all through my career of being thrown into the deep end of the pool, or having such a short attention span, which I do, demanding it, I was always in a condition where things were in flux and things were changing. In some instances, in the low and partners turnaround, you may remember the low agency, we had 10 months to do that, or they were going to basically shut the place. So of course the turnaround took 3 years, but 10 months to show some promise. And so the dissection of the community by those who are catalysts or resistors is vital. But let me zero in on the catalyst for a moment, because apropos your comment, they come in 2 flavors. The vocal resistor, who, as you so rightly said, are driven by some degree of, oh my God, I don't think I can do this. But they manifest their emotion, which, interestingly enough, if you look up the definition of emotion, it is a reaction to circumstance. So their reaction is to be fearful and defensive. But there's another kind of resistor. Hey, that's great. Oh, that's wonderful.
Oh, they're the worst.
You can feel a great big Bowie knife in your back as they do that. Now, there is something I call the persistent resistor. And after you have given the resistor every opportunity, maybe you've given them training, maybe you've given them additional resources, you've done everything you can through your empathy to provide them with a condition to succeed and come around, and they still resist, you have one pathway. Fire them. One of the misnomers is that emotional intelligent leadership is kumbaya. It is not. Apropos, your description, the other person's description of you in the 360 is the profile of an emotional intelligent leader. It's like, right? Being blunt and direct, but out of love, is definitively emotionally intelligent. Yeah. So, Angela Arendt, my hero, was an emotional intelligent leader. But let me tell you, she is no wallflower. So there are times when you must exert and decisiveness, remembering. And I remember finally letting this person go after many, many, many months. And the emails I got, Kevin, it's about time. What took you so long? Remember the effect, that these people have on other people.
Well, I do think in general, there's a fallacy that, collaboration equals consensus, which does not. And to your point, emotional intelligence equals, or being that type of open, emotionally available, I guess, and perceptive leader equals, to your point, kumbaya. I just want, because I kind of know the answer, but I think you're going to take it to the next level. So I want to hear you talk about it. What is the negative consequence of that, of trying to be that kumbaya consensus? What happens to the people and to the work?
Yeah, I think I love the term calibration, because each situation, my emotional antenna has to go up to say, how am I going to comport myself in this situation? For example, you can walk into a situation and it's a crisis. Yeah. It's a serious circumstance. And I remember saying to a colleague of mine, get started, and I said, Douglas, I love you more than life itself, but right now this is not a democracy. This is what we're going to do. And so I realized there are certain times, but notice that I still always provide a prefacing articulation that I'm not an automaton, but there are times when I'm not going to explain myself.
Right. And you might have more information that they don't have.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And it's very difficult when you're operating in those circumstances. And I do try, wasn't always successful, in at least closing the loop so that they could understand later why I was doing what I was doing. And it certainly requires quite a leap of faith from my people who are wondering, did he have a lobotomy? I mean, what's going on here? And, you know, give them that loop factor.
So again, I just want to pause for a second because I think that is so important from what I've seen in business and just in life is you may not always be explained in the moment. So first of all, there's a level of trust and intent that people believe. But second, to your point, looping back and explaining, hey, we didn't go with your idea or we went in this direction that you don't agree with because of these reasons. And doing that at the right time, I think makes all the difference between ending up with a team of resistors and people who I use the word calibration, which I love. I've been using alignment. I really love calibration though, but really saying, okay, we don't have to agree, but we need to be in alignment, which are two very different things.
You know, you just touched on another facet of this, which comes from, I think it's Hertzberg, the theory of contingency. In other words, that each personality will respond to slightly different kinds of stimulus. So let's take Peter, Paul, and Mary from the group, right? So Peter, I could go, and because Peter is exceedingly sensitive, my emotional antenna will say, I have to approach him on a particular subject in a certain way. Paul is very, very direct himself. He's all about the facts, which means I can say to Peter, you know, here's what I'd like to see more of. This was really terrific, but here's what I'd like to see more of. Paul, I'd say, that was really dumb. I don't know what you were thinking. Try this. Oh, okay. And happy as Larry, you know, because that personality. Yeah. So anyway, that's another thing is only through empathy can you know how you would calibrate for each of those respective people.
So here's a funny offshoot on that I'll just share. If you have a Peloton out there, you have favorite instructors. Some of these instructors are super in your face. Some of them are gentle. And I've learned that if I ask someone who has a Peloton who their favorite instructors are, I've learned a little bit about how I can interact with them. So if they like Kendall and Alex, right? I know, and I love those two. Those are me. I'm like, in your face is okay because that's what motivates them, right? If you like some of the other ones, you might like a gentler approach.
That is so funny. It's absolutely true. That's true.
It's a little thing I've learned about people that it seems to correlate who their Peloton instructors are that they like and how they operate kind of in the world.
Fabulous.
I know we're kind of running out of time, but well, first of all, where can people go? I mean, I have so many other questions I could ask you. We might need to have you back. Where can people go to connect with you, get your books, like all of that? Let's get that out of the way and we'll put all of it in the show notes.
Well, thank you. We run a company called EI Games. It's an emotional, intelligent, game-based learning company. So Kevin at EI Games is the best place to find me as an email address, or certainly eigames.com.
Awesome. We'll put that in the show notes too.
Great.
I'm curious. One of the reasons I was excited to have you on is not just to banter about advertising, of course, because not everybody it's fun to talk about those days, but mostly because you've had an incredible career and you've been a part of or led some really disruptive and kind of amazing things out there. So when I was reading your bio, I was like, wow, this is really impressive. But there's a layer, I think, to you that's beneath that, that's more about the people and the experience than just the launch this campaign, made billions of dollars, right? Like all that good stuff. What are you most proud of when you look back at your career?
I'm most proud that people who were the most unlikely people found themselves in a position of leadership. Nina DeSessa, the first woman creative director. Suresh Nair, a guy from India who went on to become the head of strategic planning at Gray. Me, the first openly gay guy to the board of McCann. I'm immensely proud of that. And maybe what I'm also proud of is that my corporate life allowed me also to pursue some profound passions. In the case, for example, of joining the board of the AIDS Quilt. And McCann Erickson, we convinced them to sponsor and bring the quilt to McCann, the first agency to hold, an AIDS quilt. Yeah, it was fantastic. So I think ultimately, I often think that I don't remember the accomplishments as much as I do the people I was with.
Yeah.
And how our lives changed together. Because that is, at the end of the day, when you look back, what you really are left with.
Yeah. Wow. I'd love to have some closing words on that, but I feel like what you said was so powerful that I'm just going to leave it there. So that was incredible. I think we need to have you back. So I've got like some more questions we didn't even get to. But I just want to tell you personally, I got a lot out of this interview. I know all the listeners who are listening and now have, and that will listen will. And I just really appreciate the blend of business, but also the human side of it. I think we often miss that. I used to laugh because I think back in the day, I don't think this is true anymore, but I don't know if you felt this, but it used to be like you left your personal person at the door when you walked through the office door. And then you became this other person. And all of us were expected to be like that. It wasn't just me or you. And there's this beautiful, I think, transformation happening in our business world, especially after 2020, where, suddenly you're seeing my dog and my kids in the background and what my life is like, right? Like I've let you into my world in a way that didn't happen before that because you didn't see my world this way. So, but I think if I were to look at what's good that came out of it, I would say that this recognition of like the human side of all of this has become more prevalent, more important. I
would agree. Someone asked me this morning, they said, "Oh, can you recommend a really good business book?" And instinctively I said, yes, Maya Angelou's Letters to My Daughter.
Yeah. You're like, what?
Yeah. And she goes, well, why did you say that? I said, well, just remember what she said. You may be forgotten for what you said, and you may be forgotten for what you did, but you're never forgotten for how you make people feel. And therein lies the key to success from my perspective.
Have you read, is it Robert Greene's book? Is it the 48 Laws of Influence or the something?
Oh, yes.
Influence? My favorite story in there, and I'm sure you'll remember kind of when I started talking about it, is when he talks about like John, when he went to a dinner party, everybody knew that he was the smartest person in the room. But when Kevin went to a dinner party, he made me feel like the smartest person in the room. I'm talking about like that being real connection and influence. I couldn't tell you the whole story, but that's the one thing I never forgot.
Wonderful.
Kevin, thank you. What a pleasure. I have no doubt we'll have you back on.
I look forward to it. Thank you so much for your time.